If she's really dangerous, a little boy whispered, gripping his mother's hand. Why is she the only one who looks scared? The question floated through the crowd just as 4 police officers snapped handcuffs around Monica Ellison's wrists in the middle of Riverside Plaza in Austin, Texas. Hundreds of shoppers stopped walking. Phones rose into the air almost in perfect unison. Within seconds, every camera seemed pointed at the 36-year-old black woman standing silently beside a stone fountain, her grocery bag tipped over, oranges rolling across the pavement. No one rushed to help her. No one asked what had happened. The only thing people wanted was a better angle for their videos. One officer tightened his grip on Monica's arm, while another instructed everyone to stay back. Flashing patrol lights painted the storefront windows red and blue, turning an ordinary Saturday afternoon into a spectacle no one would soon forget. Murmurs spread faster than facts. She must have attacked somebody. Maybe she stole something. They wouldn't cuff her like that for nothing. Monica heard every word. She kept her shoulders straight, even though the cold metal pressed painfully against her wrists. She knew that speaking now would accomplish nothing. The louder the crowd became, the quieter she forced herself to remain. A young cashier from a nearby coffee shop stepped outside with her apron still on, staring in disbelief. An elderly couple paused halfway to their car, exchanging uncertain glances. Teenagers live-streamed the scene while strangers filled the comment sections before anyone even knew Monica's name. In less than a minute, she had become the villain in hundreds of stories that had not yet been written. Officer Daniel Mercer stood a few feet away, reading from a small notepad with practiced confidence. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as he informed Monica that she was being detained while officers investigated a reported disturbance. Monica looked directly at him. "May I ask what I supposedly did?" she said evenly. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward another officer, who simply motioned for him to continue following. Procedure. That brief hesitation went unnoticed by almost everyone watching, but Monica saw it. There was uncertainty hiding behind the uniform, if only for a heartbeat. Across the plaza, a street musician slowly lowered his guitar. Even the music had stopped. The silence lasted only a moment before someone shouted, "Quit pretending you're innocent." Laughter followed. Monica closed her eyes for the briefest second. She thought about calling her sister, but her phone had already been placed on the hood of a patrol vehicle. She thought about explaining herself, yet every face surrounding her already seemed convinced they knew the truth. She understood something painful that afternoon. Once a crowd decides who you are, facts have to fight much harder than assumptions. A television news van pulled into the parking lot with surprising speed, as if it had been waiting nearby for something dramatic to happen. Reporters hurried toward the growing circle of spectators. Microphones appeared. Camera operators searched for the perfect shot of Monica standing in handcuffs beneath the bright Texas sun. One producer quietly told a colleague, "This is leading the evening broadcast." Monica heard those words too. Somehow, hearing that frightened her more than the handcuffs themselves. She wasn't afraid of being judged by a courtroom she had never entered. She was afraid of being judged by millions of strangers who would never stay long enough to hear the ending. As another patrol vehicle arrived, the crowd grew larger instead of smaller. Parents lifted children onto benches for a better view. More phones recorded. More whispers became confident accusations. Yet among all those faces, one person watched differently. Near the edge of the fountain stood a middle-aged maintenance worker wearing a faded city parks uniform. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't filming. He wasn't shouting. His eyes never left the exact place where everything had begun, as though he had seen something no one else had noticed. Monica caught his gaze for only a second before an officer guided her toward the waiting patrol car. Neither of them spoke, but in that silent exchange, something changed. Hidden beneath the noise of the crowd, beneath the flashing lights and endless assumptions, the first crack in the official story had already appeared. By the time Monica Ellison's patrol car pulled away from Riverside Plaza, the videos had already escaped the parking lot. They spread across social media faster than the flashing lights that had surrounded her only minutes earlier. Every clip showed the same unforgettable image: a black woman standing in handcuffs while four uniformed officers escorted her toward a police cruiser. None of the recordings showed what had happened before the arrest. None explained why she had remained so calm. Yet millions of opinions were already forming from less than 30 seconds of footage. Inside the patrol vehicle, Monica stared through the window without speaking. Downtown Austin passed by in blurred reflections of glass buildings and afternoon traffic. Officer Daniel Mercer sat beside the driver, reviewing paperwork on a digital tablet. Every few moments he glanced toward Monica, then quickly looked away again. Something about the report in front of him bothered him, although he could not yet explain why. The dispatch notes described an aggressive suspect who had resisted officers, but the woman sitting only a few feet away had not raised her voice once since being placed in handcuffs. At police headquarters, Monica was guided into a small interview room with gray walls, a metal table, and a single security camera mounted high in one corner. The handcuffs remained on while another officer photographed her belongings one item at a time. Her wallet, her keys, her phone, a folded grocery receipt, a small notebook filled with handwritten reminders. Everything looked painfully ordinary. Officer Rebecca Sloan entered carrying a file. She introduced herself politely before asking, "Ms. Ellison, would you like to explain what happened this afternoon?" Monica met her eyes. "I would," she answered quietly. "But first I'd like someone to tell me what you think I actually did." The room fell silent. Rebecca opened the file again. She searched through several pages before reading the allegation exactly as it had been submitted. According to the complaint, Monica had threatened another shopper, refused lawful instructions, and created a disturbance that endangered public safety. Monica listened without interrupting. When Rebecca finished, Monica slowly shook her head. "Every single sentence is wrong," she replied. There was no anger in her voice, only disappointment. Across the hall, Daniel Mercer overheard part of the conversation while preparing his own report. He frowned. During the arrest, he had expected an emotional outburst, yet Monica continued answering every question with remarkable composure. His memory drifted back to the plaza. He remembered arriving after the initial call had already been made. He remembered other officers directing the scene before he had even spoken to Monica. Most of all, he remembered the maintenance workers standing beside the fountain, watching everything unfold without recording a single second on his phone. That image refused to leave his mind. Meanwhile, outside the station, television stations replayed the arrest throughout the evening. Headlines described a dramatic public detention. Commentators debated police procedure without having access to the full sequence of events. Online posts collected hundreds of thousands of reactions. Some viewers praised the officers before any investigation had begun. Others questioned why 4 officers had been needed to restrain a woman who never appeared to struggle. The divided opinions only fueled more attention. At Riverside Plaza, the crowd had long since disappeared, but one man remained. City maintenance employee Harold Benson quietly swept scattered leaves around the fountain where Monica had been arrested. Earlier, while everyone else watched the officers, Harold had been looking in another direction entirely. His eyes had followed a security camera mounted beneath the roofline of a sporting goods store overlooking the exact location where the confrontation had started. As he finished his shift, he glanced up at the camera once more. If it had been working, it had seen everything from the very beginning. Harold hesitated before pulling an old business card from his wallet. Printed across, it was the name of the shopping center's security supervisor. He slipped the card back into his pocket and walked toward his truck, unaware that one simple decision before sunrise could change the course of Monica Ellison's life. Back inside the station, Officer Daniel Mercer stared at the incomplete incident report on his screen. One sentence in particular refused to make sense. It claimed the suspect became confrontational before officers arrived. Daniel had not witnessed that. Neither had anyone whose statement he personally collected. He leaned back in his chair, reading the report again and again. For the first time that day, a question quietly formed in his mind. What if the loudest version of the story was not the true one? The following morning, Monica Ellison woke to the unfamiliar sound of a detention cell door sliding open. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the sea of raised phones, heard the whispers from strangers who had already decided who she was, and felt the cold steel of the handcuffs biting into her wrists. A detention officer informed her that she would remain available while investigators completed their preliminary review. No charges had been formally filed yet, but no one seemed eager to explain why she was still there. Monica thanked the officer politely, sat back down, and folded her hands in her lap. Losing her temper would accomplish nothing. Across town, the videos from Riverside Plaza continued to dominate local news broadcasts. Some television hosts questioned whether officers had acted too aggressively, while others insisted the public should trust law enforcement until proven otherwise. The internet proved even harsher. Thousands of strangers debated Monica's character despite knowing nothing about her beyond a few seconds of edited footage. Her employer began receiving phone calls asking whether she was still employed. Neighbors exchanged rumors outside apartment buildings. Friends who knew her well refused to believe the accusations, but their voices were nearly drowned out by the overwhelming noise online. At Austin Police Headquarters, Officer Daniel Mercer could not stop thinking about the inconsistencies buried inside the incident report. Before starting his shift, he reopened every document submitted the previous afternoon. One witness statement claimed Monica had shouted threats before officers arrived. Another reported hearing no argument at all until police vehicles entered the plaza. A third statement described Monica as resisting detention, yet Daniel vividly remembered her standing perfectly still with her hands visible. The contradictions were impossible to ignore. He carried the file to Sergeant Michael Grady's office and knocked gently on the open door. "Something doesn't line up," Daniel admitted. The sergeant skimmed the paperwork for only a few moments before sliding it back across the desk. "Eyewitnesses contradict each other every day," he replied. "Finish your report and let internal affairs worry about the rest if they decide to." Daniel nodded respectfully, but the answer offered little comfort. As he walked back through the hallway, he noticed Officer Rebecca Sloan reviewing Monica's interview recording. Rebecca paused the video several times, paying close attention to Monica's expressions rather than her words. "She's remarkably consistent," Rebecca observed quietly. "People usually change details when they're lying. She hasn't." Daniel looked at the paused image on the monitor. Monica appeared exhausted but composed, never raising her voice, never speaking with anger, only repeating the same calm account from beginning to end. "Do you believe her?" Daniel asked. Rebecca hesitated before answering. "I believe someone is missing part of this story." Meanwhile, Harold Benson returned to Riverside Plaza for another maintenance shift. As he swept debris from the brick walkway surrounding the fountain, he found himself replaying yesterday's events over and over again. He remembered arriving only minutes before the police. He remembered seeing Monica standing beside a fallen grocery bag, while another shopper argued loudly nearby. Most importantly, he remembered looking up instinctively toward the shopping center's security camera. Harold knew the camera's field of view covered nearly the entire plaza entrance. If the system had been recording, it would have captured every second leading up to the arrest, not just the dramatic ending that everyone had already seen online. During his lunch break, Harold finally walked into the shopping center management office. The receptionist smiled politely as he requested to speak with security supervisor Kevin Dalton. A few minutes later, Kevin emerged carrying a clipboard. Harold explained what he had witnessed and asked a simple question. "Are yesterday's security recordings still saved?" Kevin's expression immediately changed. "Our cameras overwrite every 72 hours, he replied. "If someone needs the footage, they need to request it soon." Harold looked toward the hallway window overlooking the plaza. 72 hours suddenly felt dangerously short. Back at police headquarters, Daniel Mercer sat alone at his desk after most officers had gone home. Instead of finishing paperwork, he enlarged a still frame captured from one of the bystanders' cell phone videos. Hundreds of people filled the background. Most were looking toward Monica. Only one person was looking somewhere else. It was the maintenance worker wearing the city park's uniform. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Why hadn't that man been staring at Monica like everyone else? What had caught his attention instead? Daniel wrote down the words, "Locate maintenance worker," in the margin of his notebook before closing the file. He still had no proof that Monica Ellison had been wrongfully detained. But for the first time since the arrest, he finally had something even more valuable than proof. He had a direction to follow. By the second day, the story no longer belonged to Monica Ellison. It belonged to television panels, online commentators, and strangers who had never spoken a single word to her. Her face appeared beside bold headlines on local news websites. Radio hosts argued over whether the officers had acted heroically or recklessly. Social media users dissected every frame of the cell phone videos, freezing images and drawing conclusions from expressions captured in fractions of a second. The loudest voices always sounded the most certain, even though almost none of them knew how the confrontation had actually begun. Monica remained inside the detention facility's interview area while attorneys and investigators continued reviewing the case. She had finally been allowed a phone call. Her older sister, Vanessa, answered before the first ring finished. There was relief in her voice simply hearing Monica speak. "I'm coming," Vanessa promised immediately. "Whatever they're saying online doesn't matter. I know you." Monica smiled for the first time in nearly 2 days. "Don't argue with people on the internet," she replied softly. "They've already made up their minds." After hanging up, Monica sat quietly by the narrow window. Sunlight stretched across the concrete floor, reminding her that life outside continued while hers remained suspended in uncertainty. Across town, Officer Daniel Mercer drove back to Riverside Plaza during his lunch break. Officially, he was there to verify several witness locations for his supplemental report. Unofficially, he was following the question that refused to leave his thoughts. He found Harold Benson trimming shrubs near the fountain where the arrest had taken place. Daniel introduced himself and asked if Harold had been present 2 days earlier. Harold nodded slowly. "I was," he answered. "I watched almost everything." Daniel expected an immediate explanation, but Harold instead looked toward the shopping center buildings. "The important witness wasn't me," he said. "It's hanging over there." Daniel followed Harold's gaze to the security camera mounted beneath the roofline of the sporting goods store. "That camera sees this entire entrance," Harold continued. "If it recorded that afternoon, it'll show what happened before everyone started filming." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Did anyone request the footage?" Harold shook his head. "Not while I was here." Daniel thanked him and immediately walked toward the shopping center management office. Inside, Security Supervisor Kevin Dalton greeted him professionally, but looked concerned when Daniel explained why he had come. Kevin checked the archive system on his computer before speaking. "The footage still exists," he said, "but our automatic system deletes recordings after 72 hours. You've got less than a day before it's permanently overwritten." Daniel glanced at the clock mounted above the reception desk. Time had suddenly become their biggest enemy. He requested that the footage be preserved immediately while formal paperwork was processed. Kevin agreed, but explained company policy required authorization before releasing copies. Daniel left the office with a mixture of hope and frustration. For the first time, there was a realistic chance that objective evidence existed. But if paperwork moved too slowly, that evidence could disappear forever. Back at headquarters, Daniel informed Sergeant Michael Grady about the surveillance recording. The sergeant listened patiently before folding his arms. "If the video exists, request it," he said. "But don't expect miracles. Security footage rarely changes everything." Daniel respected his supervisor's experience, yet something inside him disagreed. This case already felt different. Too many statements conflicted with one another. Too many assumptions had replaced facts. Later that afternoon, Officer Rebecca Sloan entered the records office carrying Monica's interview transcript. She compared every statement Monica had made against witness reports collected at the scene. Once again, the inconsistencies were impossible to ignore. Monica's timeline remained identical from beginning to end. Several witnesses, however, had changed details each time they were questioned. Rebecca quietly highlighted the contradictions before placing the file on Daniel's desk. "You're not the only one seeing this," she said. Daniel looked at the highlighted pages and realized he was no longer chasing his instincts alone. Meanwhile, outside police headquarters, television crews continued waiting for updates. Reporters rehearsed live broadcasts while camera operators adjusted their equipment. Every network expected an announcement before evening. None of them knew that the most important evidence had not yet been seen by anyone inside the investigation. As the sun began setting over Austin, Daniel submitted the emergency preservation request for the surveillance recording. He watched the confirmation email disappear into the system and leaned back in his chair. Somewhere inside a digital storage server, the truth was either waiting to be discovered or only hours away from being erased forever. At 8:17 the next morning, a secure email arrived in Officer Daniel Mercer's inbox with a subject line that made his heart race. "Evidence preservation approved." He opened it immediately. The shopping center had successfully locked the surveillance recording before the automatic deletion system erased it forever. For the first time since Monica Ellison had been handcuffed in front of hundreds of strangers, The investigation finally had something that did not depend on opinions, assumptions, or conflicting memories. It had an impartial witness. Daniel carried the authorization paperwork straight to Riverside Plaza, where Security Supervisor Kevin Dalton was already waiting in the surveillance office. The room was small, illuminated by dozens of monitors displaying live feeds from entrances, parking lots, sidewalks, and storefronts. Kevin inserted a security key, logged into the archive server, and located the recording from the afternoon of Monica's arrest. This camera covers almost the entire fountain area, Kevin explained. It doesn't record audio, but the picture is clear. Daniel nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. The video began nearly 20 minutes before police vehicles entered the plaza. Customers walked casually between stores. Children tossed coins into the fountain. Street musicians entertained passing families. Monica eventually appeared carrying 2 reusable grocery bags, moving at an unhurried pace toward the parking lot. Nothing about her behavior suggested panic, anger, or confrontation. Daniel leaned closer. "Keep playing," he said quietly. A few moments later, another shopper entered the frame. The woman walked directly toward Monica, stopping only a few feet away. Although there was no audio, her animated gestures made it obvious she was speaking forcefully. Monica responded briefly, remaining where she stood. The other woman stepped closer. Monica took one small step backward instead of forward. Daniel immediately noticed the difference between what the report had described and what the camera actually showed. According to several witness statements, Monica had aggressively approached another shopper. The video revealed the opposite. "Pause it," Daniel requested. Kevin froze the image. Monica's feet were positioned behind the spot where she had first stopped. Every movement she had made was defensive rather than confrontational. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Run it again from 30 seconds earlier. They watched carefully for a second time. Once again, Monica never appeared to chase, corner, or threaten anyone. She simply tried to create distance while the other woman repeatedly closed the gap between them. Then something even more significant happened. One of Monica's grocery bags slipped from her hand, scattering fruit across the pavement. Instead of moving toward the other shopper, Monica instinctively bent down to collect the fallen groceries. Seconds later, several bystanders rushed into view. More people gathered. Cell phones appeared. The crowd that later believed Monica had started the disturbance had never witnessed the beginning at all. They had arrived only after the situation had already escalated. Daniel remained silent as the recording continued. Patrol vehicles entered the frame. Officers approached quickly from different directions. Because the responding officers had arrived during the most chaotic moment, they had been forced to rely almost entirely on statements from witnesses already standing nearby. Daniel understood how easily a flawed first impression could shape every decision that followed. Yet one detail still bothered him. "Go back 10 seconds before the officers arrive," he said. Kevin rewound the recording. Daniel watched frame by frame until he suddenly pointed toward the corner of the screen. Right there. Kevin enlarged the image. Standing near the fountain was Harold Benson, the maintenance worker. Unlike everyone else, Harold was not watching Monica. His attention was fixed on the interaction from the very beginning, before spectators crowded the scene. Daniel realized why Harold had seemed so certain when they first spoke. He had not relied on rumors or edited cell phone clips. He had witnessed the entire sequence unfold with his own eyes. Daniel requested a copy of the recording for investigators and carefully documented the exact timestamps showing Monica stepping backward, dropping her groceries, and remaining non-aggressive throughout the encounter. Although the video still lacked sound, it contradicted the central assumption behind the incident report. Monica had not been the person advancing the confrontation. She had been retreating from it. As Daniel placed the evidence drive into a sealed evidence envelope, he understood that this recording alone would not answer every question. But it had done something just as important. It had cracked the foundation of the official narrative. Outside the surveillance office, reporters continued broadcasting updates without knowing that only a few hundred feet away, the first undeniable pieces of the truth had finally emerged from the shadows. Less than 48 hours after Monica Ellison was publicly handcuffed, the evidence room at Austin Police Headquarters became the quietest place in the building. Officer Daniel Mercer placed the surveillance recording onto a secure workstation while Sergeant Michael Grady, Officer Rebecca Sloan, two investigators, and a department legal advisor gathered around the monitor. No one spoke as the video began. They had all read the reports. They had all seen the cell phone clips that flooded social media. Now, for the first time, they were about to watch what happened before the crowd arrived. The recording played from the beginning. Monica entered the plaza carrying grocery bags exactly as Daniel had described. She stopped near the fountain. Another shopper approached her. Again, there was no audio, but the body language was unmistakable. Monica remained composed. She never pointed aggressively. She never lunged forward. Every few seconds, she increased the distance between herself and the other woman. "Pause," Rebecca said softly. Daniel froze the image. "She's backing away," Rebecca observed. "Not advancing." The legal advisor quietly nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. "Continue." They watched the next minute unfold. In complete silence, Monica's grocery bag slipped. Fruit scattered across the pavement. She bent down instinctively to collect it. Before she could finish, more bystanders entered the frame. Within seconds, people who had not witnessed the beginning surrounded the scene. Several phones appeared. Then patrol vehicles arrived. Daniel noticed something else that had escaped everyone's attention before. The first officers entered a situation already surrounded by excited spectators pointing in different directions. Their first impressions had been shaped by confusion rather than by the complete sequence of events. The video reached the moment where Monica was placed in handcuffs. Once again, she never appeared to struggle physically. She complied with every visible instruction. When the recording ended, the room remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, Sergeant Grady exhaled slowly. "This changes the timeline," he admitted. Rebecca looked down at the witness statements spread across the conference table. "Not just the timeline," she replied. "Several statements claim Monica was the aggressor before officers arrived. This footage doesn't support that conclusion." The legal advisor closed the folder in front of him. "At minimum," he said carefully, "the investigation needs to be expanded before anyone reaches a final determination." Those words carried enormous weight. Until that moment, Monica had been viewed primarily as the subject of an arrest. Now she had become the center of a case whose facts were no longer as clear as everyone had believed. News of the surveillance footage remained confidential while investigators verified every detail. Monica, still unaware of what had been discovered, sat quietly in another interview room speaking with her attorney. She expected more difficult questions. Instead, the attorney noticed an unusual shift in tone when investigators entered. Their questions became more precise. They no longer assumed answers. They asked for clarification instead of confrontation. Monica sensed something had changed, although no one explained what it was. Across the city, the television stations continued replaying the same cell phone footage that had made Monica appear guilty in the eyes of countless viewers. None of those broadcasts included the surveillance recording because it had not yet been released publicly. The difference between public perception and private evidence had never been greater. Online comments continued pouring in by the thousands. Some demanded harsher punishment. Others insisted something about the arrest had never seemed right. The debate grew louder with every passing hour, completely unaware that investigators were now watching an entirely different version of events behind closed doors. That afternoon, Daniel Mercer and Rebecca Sloan met once more with Harold Benson. This time, they thanked him for coming forward. Harold listened patiently before saying something that neither officer would forget. "Crowds don't usually witness the beginning," he said. "They witness the loudest part. Then they convince themselves they've seen the whole story." Daniel wrote the sentence into his notebook almost word for word. It captured everything this investigation had become. Before leaving, Harold added one final detail. He remembered seeing another business facing the plaza whose entrance camera pointed toward the same location from a different angle. Daniel immediately looked up. A second recording might exist. If the first camera had cracked the official narrative, another angle could reveal the final pieces still missing. As evening settled over Austin, investigators prepared formal requests for additional surveillance footage while Monica waited in quiet uncertainty, unaware that the truth had finally begun moving faster than the rumors that had nearly destroyed her life. The conference room was filled long before the press briefing began. Reporters arranged microphones across the front table while television cameras pointed toward a large projection screen that remained completely blank. No one outside the investigation knew why the Austin Police Department had called a second public statement only 3 days after Monica Ellison's arrest. Rumors spread quickly through the crowd. Some expected criminal charges. Others believed the department was preparing to defend the officers once again. Few imagined that the story was about to change direction entirely. Monica sat quietly in a private waiting room nearby with her attorney and her sister, Vanessa. She had finally been released pending the outcome of the investigation earlier that morning, but freedom brought little relief. Her face had become recognizable throughout the city. She could not enter a grocery store or gas station without wondering who had already seen the videos. Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens today," she said gently, "the truth hasn't changed." Monica smiled faintly. "I just hope people are willing to hear it." At the same time, Officer Daniel Mercer carried 2 evidence drives into the conference room. The first contained the surveillance recording from the sporting goods store. The second held footage recovered from another business facing the plaza. That second camera had filled in several missing angles from the original recording. Together, the videos formed an uninterrupted timeline from the first conversation near the fountain until Monica was placed in handcuffs. Sergeant Michael Grady reviewed the final presentation one last time before nodding toward the department's legal advisor. "We're ready." As reporters settled into their seats, the briefing began with a short statement explaining that newly reviewed evidence had significantly expanded investigators' understanding of the incident. No conclusions were announced at first. Instead, the lights dimmed, and the surveillance recording appeared on the large screen. The room fell silent almost immediately. Journalists watched Monica calmly walking across Riverside Plaza carrying grocery bags. They watched another shopper approach her. They watched Monica repeatedly step backward while trying to create distance. They watched her groceries spill across the sidewalk as she bent down to gather them. Then they saw spectators arrive only after the confrontation had already escalated. Finally, they watched officers enter a confusing situation shaped by incomplete information. When the recording ended, nobody spoke. Several reporters quietly lowered their pens. Others replayed the final seconds in their minds, comparing them with the cell phone videos they had broadcast repeatedly during the previous 3 days. The difference was impossible to ignore. One journalist slowly raised her hand. "Is it accurate to say," she asked carefully, "that this footage does not support the original public assumption that Ms. Ellison initiated the confrontation?" The department's legal advisor chose his words with unusual precision. "The newly obtained evidence shows that earlier public interpretations were incomplete. The investigation remains ongoing, but the surveillance recordings provide important context that was unavailable during the initial response." It was a cautious statement, yet everyone in the room understood its significance. Outside headquarters, news organizations interrupted regular programming to air the surveillance footage. This time viewers saw the beginning instead of only the ending. Social media users who had confidently declared Monica guilty only days earlier now watched the complete sequence unfold before their eyes. Some deleted earlier comments without explanation. Others apologized publicly for rushing to judgment. Many simply stopped typing altogether. At Riverside Plaza, several employees gathered around a television inside the shopping center break room. The young coffee shop cashier who had watched Monica's arrest covered her mouth in disbelief. "She never went after anyone," she whispered. "She was trying to leave." Harold Benson stood silently near the doorway. He did not celebrate. He did not say, "I told you so." He simply watched the truth finally reach the people who had never seen the first minute of the encounter. Meanwhile, Monica and Vanessa sat together in the waiting room as the live broadcast played on a small television mounted in the corner. Monica watched herself step backward again and again on the surveillance footage. She remembered every second of that afternoon. Now, for the first time, everyone else could remember it correctly too. Vanessa glanced toward her sister with tears beginning to form in her eyes. Monica remained quiet. She felt neither triumph nor anger. She felt something far heavier. Relief. Outside police headquarters, reporters who had arrived expecting another routine briefing left the building speaking far more softly than they had entered. The sidewalks remained crowded. Cameras were still recording. But the loud accusations that had echoed through Riverside Plaza only days earlier had disappeared. In their place was something far more powerful. An entire crowd confronted with the full truth had nothing left to say. The morning after the surveillance footage was released, Austin felt like a different city. The same television stations that had repeatedly aired Monica Ellison being led away in handcuffs now opened their broadcasts with the newly discovered recordings. The headlines had changed. Instead of asking what crime Monica had committed, reporters were asking how an incomplete story had become accepted as fact so quickly. Editorial columns appeared overnight. Radio callers who had once defended every second of the arrest admitted they wanted answers. Even online, where opinions rarely changed, thousands of people quietly deleted comments they wished they had never written. Monica noticed none of it at first. She was sitting in her attorney's office reviewing documents related to the investigation. Every page reminded her how quickly an ordinary Saturday afternoon had transformed into the most painful week of her life. Her attorney closed one folder before speaking. The department has officially informed us that the initial findings no longer support the original public narrative, he said. They're continuing the investigation, but the evidence has fundamentally changed the direction of the case. Monica lowered her eyes. She had imagined this moment many times while sitting alone in the interview room. She thought she would feel victorious. Instead, she simply felt tired. The videos won't disappear, she said quietly. People will always remember seeing me in handcuffs before they remember why. Her attorney nodded. He understood there were injuries no legal document could erase. Across town, internal affairs investigators continued interviewing officers involved in the arrest. This time the surveillance. Recordings played before each interview began. Instead of asking witnesses to describe what they believed had happened, investigators asked them to explain why their original statements differed from what the cameras clearly showed. Some officers acknowledged that they had relied heavily on the accounts of excited bystanders during the rapidly developing situation. Others admitted they had never witnessed the beginning of the confrontation themselves. The investigation no longer focused on proving malicious intent. It focused on understanding how incomplete information had shaped critical decisions within only a few minutes. Officer Daniel Mercer completed another supplemental report, this one reflecting every verified detail established by the surveillance evidence. When he finished typing the final sentence, he paused before submitting it. He remembered Monica standing silently beside the patrol car while strangers shouted accusations from every direction. He remembered almost accepting those first impressions without question. Had Harold Benson never spoken up, Daniel wondered how differently this story might have ended. That afternoon, Sergeant Michael Grady gathered the officers involved in the incident inside the department briefing room. This case has reminded every one of us, he said calmly, that the first version of an event is not always the complete version. We are responsible for following evidence wherever it leads, even when that evidence challenges our initial assumptions. The room remained silent. No one argued. No one interrupted. The lesson required no further explanation. Meanwhile, Harold Benson returned to his usual maintenance route at Riverside Plaza. Most shoppers walked past without recognizing him. He preferred it that way. As he swept leaves around the same fountain where Monica had been arrested, several employees stopped to thank him for coming forward. Harold accepted their gratitude politely before answering with the same simple sentence each time. I didn't change the story. I just helped people see all of it. News organizations later reported that the department had concluded Monica's conduct shown in the surveillance. Footage was inconsistent with the widespread public assumptions formed immediately after the arrest. While the broader administrative review continued, the recordings had already transformed public understanding of what had taken place. Community leaders encouraged residents to avoid rushing to judgment based on short online clips. Local organizations invited Monica to speak publicly if she ever wished to share her experience. She declined every invitation. She did not want attention. She wanted peace. Late that evening, Monica drove back to Riverside Plaza for the first time since the incident. The parking lot looked exactly the same. Families carried shopping bags. Children laughed near the fountain. Street musicians filled the evening air with familiar melodies. Standing quietly near the place where everything had begun, Monica realized the plaza itself had never been her enemy. Fear, assumptions, and incomplete stories had been. She looked toward the security camera mounted above the storefront and allowed herself one slow, steady breath. The camera had never chosen sides. It had simply remembered what everyone else had forgotten. And because of that, the truth had finally found its voice. 3 weeks after the arrest, The crowds had disappeared from Riverside Plaza, but Monica Ellison still remembered exactly where every pair of eyes had been standing. Some memories refused to fade simply because the headlines had changed. She had returned to work, resumed her morning routine, and tried to reclaim the ordinary life that had been interrupted by a few chaotic minutes. Yet every now and then someone would recognize her in a checkout line or while pumping gas. Their expressions were different now. Some offered quiet smiles. Others apologized for believing the first videos they had seen. Monica accepted every apology with kindness, but she never asked for one. She had learned that people often judged quickly because they never expected to be wrong. One Friday afternoon, Monica received an unexpected letter from the Austin Police Department requesting her presence at a small administrative meeting. Her attorney accompanied her to headquarters, where the atmosphere felt nothing like it had during the first days of the investigation. There were no hurried footsteps, no raised voices, no cameras waiting outside interview rooms. Sergeant Michael Grady greeted Monica personally before leading her into a conference room. Officer Daniel Mercer and Officer Rebecca Sloan were already seated inside. After a brief moment of silence, the sergeant spoke. "Ms. Ellison," he began, "the department has completed its internal review of the available evidence. The surveillance recordings, witness interviews, and supplemental reports established that the public understanding of your encounter at Riverside Plaza was incomplete and significantly inaccurate. We regret the impact this incident has had on you." The words were formal, carefully chosen, and measured. They could not erase the fear Monica had felt while standing in handcuffs before hundreds of strangers. They could not remove the videos that continued to exist online. But they mattered because they acknowledged something essential. The truth had finally become part of the official record. Monica thanked them quietly. She did not speak about anger or revenge. Instead, she asked a single question. "Will this help the next person?" The room fell silent. Daniel Mercer answered first. "It already has," he said. He explained that the department had begun reviewing additional procedures for collecting witness information during rapidly developing public incidents. Officers would receive updated guidance emphasizing the importance of identifying available surveillance footage as early as possible whenever practical. Rebecca Sloan added that investigators had also discussed how quickly incomplete cell phone clips could shape public perception before evidence was fully examined. Monica listened carefully. Those changes mattered more to her than any headline ever could. As they prepared to leave, Daniel stopped Monica near the doorway. "There's something I've wanted to say," he admitted. "When I first arrived that afternoon, I almost accepted the loudest version of the story without questioning it. Harold Benson reminded me to keep looking. I'm grateful he did." Monica nodded gently. "We all only see part of someone's life," she replied. "The hard part is remembering that before we decide who they are." A few days later, Riverside Plaza hosted a small community gathering focused on neighborhood safety and communication. There were no television crews, no dramatic speeches. Families walked between information booths while children played near the same fountain where Monica's groceries had once rolled across the pavement. Harold Benson stood quietly beside the landscaping he had spent years maintaining. When Monica noticed him, she walked over and thanked him once again. Harold smiled modestly. "The cameras preserve the facts," he said. "I only made sure someone remembered they were there." Monica laughed softly. Sometimes that's enough to change everything. Before leaving the plaza, Monica paused near the fountain one last time. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the water exactly as it had on the day her life unexpectedly changed. She watched children tossing coins into the fountain, making wishes they believed might come true. She thought about the frightened little boy who had asked his mother why the woman in handcuffs looked more afraid than dangerous. She never learned his name, but she hoped he had also seen the truth when the full story was finally shown. As Monica turned toward the parking lot, she realized something important. Justice had not arrived with flashing lights or loud announcements. It had arrived quietly, carried by patience, evidence, honest questions, and people willing to admit when they had been wrong. Behind her, the plaza continued with its ordinary rhythm, almost as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened there. But Monica knew better. Every place remembers the stories that shape it. And sometimes the greatest victory is not proving that someone else was wrong. It is walking away with your dignity intact, knowing that truth may take longer than rumors, but when it finally arrives, Even the loudest crowd has no choice but to listen.